recognize ours. So you have to be very careful as a conceal and carry owner to make sure that if you're, say you're traveling, you're driving down the interstate, I may drive through Tennessee on my way to Alabama, and Tennessee may not recognize it, but Alabama may. So you have to be very careful as to how you're transporting that firearm. Certainly, as Blake said, I could put it in my glove box, and in most states that's recognized as a legal place to have it. Otherwise, the regulation is it has to be at least 3 moves away from you. So it could be in the trunk, but it has to have the clip out, or I can't get to it in 3 moves without. But you need to make sure that you know where that license is going to be honored if you're going to be carrying in that state with an out-of-state license. So very close. Right, Mrs. Groves?
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I'm curious, you mentioned Chicago a little while ago, and being a gun-free zone, so to speak, but yet it's a high crime rate. So, and again, this is an opinion question, but what's the solution there? If we remove guns, but we still have a lot of violence, what's the solution?
I can't pronounce his name, the governor of Chicago. I read it, I couldn't pronounce, but he's put a lot of money just recently into lowering violence in the city, but in my opinion, it would be education.
Education on what?
Just education, people not dropping out of school and going on to pursue higher education and getting out of the neighborhoods that they're in, because they're just sucked into it. The kids there are just set up for failure in certain aspects. Anybody seen Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood? Yeah, I mean, that's how I would imagine it happens. I mean, them pressuring the other kids to join gangs, there's a lot of bad neighborhoods in there. So.
Blake, what's the solution? If there's high regulation of guns in Chicago, yet there's an extremely high crime rate with gun violence, I think people are getting killed, multiple people a day in Chicago, in the city, are getting killed with guns, but yet there's this high, how do we fix that? What do you think?
My opinion is that making it illegal doesn't help it, but I feel that if there was more gun education and stricter background checks, like if we improved the how much research the person they do on the person buying the gun, that would help.
Okay, Alex, if we're kind of the similar question, if we've got high regulation on guns in Chicago, very similar to what you maybe mentioned in China, but yet the gun violence rate is extremely high. Blake mentioned maybe some better education. Do we feel like the people who are committing that gun violence are registered gun owners? Do we feel like more education for those registered gun owners would help, or do we feel like that's an outlying group?
Could you state the question?
Okay. Do we
confused?
We have a lot of regulation in Chicago to keep guns out of the hands of pretty much anybody.
Yes.
But yet we have a lot of gun crime.
Yes.
Do we feel like educating people will help that, or do we feel like there's some other way maybe to reduce that gun violence?
I think the education is the only solution because the high crime rates in China or in other countries maybe is the part less educated. In China, the west part of China is more undeveloped, Tibet and or we call Xinjiang is a part of it's part of it was not part of China. It was. So so the main part is of China in the Asian China is the east part. So the west part is more like the Mongolians peoples. So they're less educated than the east part of China, people in the east part of China, and there's more violence and crime rate there.
So as levels of education decrease, gun violence goes up, is what you're saying in those parts? Okay.
Also, I think to control the population is illegal immigrants or the foreigner, illegal foreigner. You need to regulate it because in the south part of China, which is called Hong Kong, place at Hong Kong, there's a high crime rate because it's there's a lot of a foreigner there, so there maybe the crime rate is more higher, and because it's hard to control at the like the ports. And I believe there's a lot of illegal immigrant in America, so I think that's a part of the problem. Yeah.
There's been, quite a few school shootings, and like he was mentioning earlier with the guns found on Tates Creek campus. 15 years ago when I taught on the north side, we had 3 people with guns in my school that I taught at. And so how do you keep that from happening? Like, what would the solution be?
Good question.
I think part of it, like I said before, gun education would be like parental educations, like parents informing whatnot with guns, and then with regard to like the teachers having guns in school, I think we brought that up earlier, is the same as what I said earlier with the background checks. Like if a teacher clears a more progressive background check, then they could have a gun in school.
Do you know what, you probably don't since you were in class, do you know what was announced today that Fayette County's gonna do in response to that?
What I heard from the principal's report is that they were gonna look into getting metal detectors. Is that what's happening?
Increased security and metal detectors. What do you think about that?
I think I would pair that with what Blake said about education of the kids. So I grew up, I'm in gun culture. I knew never to take a gun out of the house, show it around, stuff like that. Big proponent of knives, they had switchblades, I got all these little tiny brass knuckles, and never took it out of the house, and never gonna do that, because I know what would happen with legal issues and other issues that would occur. But I think that paired with education is a smart way to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Done a great job.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.